Ladies and gentlemen, it is great to have you tonight. I know it is not the usual host that you have here, main host, Landon. He's busy in California, saving America in the usual ways he does. But forget Landon. We've got three other gentlemen here filling in those big gaps that Landon, tall, lanky man leaves. We have Matt Jefferson Davis Schultz. We
Jefferson Davis.
We have Ross Magic Johnson here, as usual. And
Still
of
got the
course,
magic.
Mike Abraham Lincoln Schaefer. And here in spirit is Landon Ulysses S. Grant Free. The speech
Could you literally not think of
I
anyone
would have
else? for
taken
me?
Stone
Anybody.
or any like
Ross George Meade. Come on, somebody.
Speech we're doing tonight is the Gettysburg Address, 1863, Abraham Lincoln. Ladies and gentlemen, you have gone on a little bit of a journey with us in order to get to this particular speech. What does that journey look like? It's the story of America. We've hit on Ed Washington's first inaugurational speech, setting America up for success, the do's, the don'ts, our first and only president of no political party. Republican? No. Democrat? No. He can't be put in the box. Then we went on to Thomas Jefferson, friend of freedom? Of course, author of the Declaration of Independence. Foe of freedom? Of course, he owned 150 people. Hey, can we have a citation on that? Steve, the producer, alternative facts, hashtag, I think the kids call it. We danced across the decades of the early 1800s, back when Landon did this podcast with us, hearing from such speakers as William Henry Harrison. I had to look up what he said because, like all Americans, I don't even remember us talking about him. He was the guy who died, sadly, 30 days after taking office here. In that same episode, we heard from Andrew, the Indian fighter Jackson, and of course, not enough of Frederick Douglass. The first time that Americans realized African Americans were naturally better at being cool than white people. Hey, hit up some of Frederick Douglass' speeches on your own time. And that brings us back to this episode. So, coming in from the corner that is red, white, and blue, the rail splitter, the great emancipator, standing at 6 feet, 5 inches, $140, a win-loss record of 2-0 when running for president, hailing from Ross Massey Johnson's Illinois capital city, Springfield, the man who need not be named, the man who proves that melancholics can become the world's most powerful person while acting like they don't care, the one, the only, Ross, who is it?
I believe we're talking about Abraham Lincoln.
That's right, Abraham Lincoln. Matt Jefferson Davis, what number president was he?
I don't know, but you practiced that really, really well, Ike.
Proves my point. Jeff Davis.
16. 16. 3 presidents after Millard Fillmore.
Okay, ladies and folks, we're talking the Gettysburg Address. Before we start hand waving here, figuring out what exactly we're even talking about, let's go to the speech itself. It's 1863. It's Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Abraham Lincoln takes the stage after a 2-hour speech from Mr. Edmund Everett. Folks are busy getting their cameras ready, one of these new technological pieces of equipment, and that tall man takes his step onto the stage after this gruesome battle where tens of thousands of Americans were killed. And he says, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Abraham Lincoln, folks. Okay, 150 some years later, hopefully y'all at home remember reading that in school, collecting some thoughts, some knee-jerk reactions. Maybe it wasn't too many thoughts, because, hey, that's just how most people work with old things. Let's kind of set the stage. Just think about this in this broader context. Opening the floor for discussion, hear from some of my cabinet members. What's going on in the war at this point? What's going on with the North? What's going on with the South? What's going on with the battles? Who's winning? Who's losing? Who's bloodier? Who's cowardice? What do you boys got for me?
Well, I believe the war had been going on for some time at this point, and if I am correct in saying, I think this was Lee's second kind of campaign to invade the northern states, to take the battle out of the South, if you will. So what's going on in the war before Gettysburg? I'm pretty sure Lee had won some pretty significant battles kind of leading up to this point. Kind of seen as an invincible general, done very well. So it's not that like the South had total control or anything like that, but I would say leading up to Gettysburg, a lot of confidence on the southern side.
Yeah, I know Chancellorsville was a big one. I've heard it referred to as the perfect battle by Robert E. Lee, famous for Stonewall Jackson's risky flanking maneuver that won them the battle. But I guess his late return from that battle also won him some friendly fire and lost him his arm prior to his life about 8 days later. But yeah, I know Chancellorsville was a big one leading up to there. Momentum was sounds like mostly with the South at that point. But yeah, it's been quite a lot of back and forth at this point.
I think 17,000 casualties for the good guys at Chancellorsville, 13,000 for the bad. Obviously casualties includes killed and wounded, but I am sure it was way over a few thousand that were killed. And I mean, just to like think about that for a second, the Iraq War, America's longest lasting war. Some numbers from Steve here. Iraq War, number of Americans killed. Mention the Iraqi people, of course. But 4,000, 4,400. Obviously, every single one of those were tragic, for sure. But one battle was presumably a lot more than that versus the 20 some years now of the Iraq War. Crazy. Just puts things in perspective. It's like it's like Russia in World War II. Remember that one, guys? Gosh, it's like they lost the whole country. Crazy. Okay. What else do we know going on there?
So we're still pre the battle though.
Sure. Yeah. I'm an eighth grade student. I'm just thinking about smoking dope after school. Make me care about the Gettysburg Address. We're it's like I'm a teacher. The kids didn't study their notes, and I'm having to just animate myself to bring life to this lesson. We're 2 years into the war, right? I looked up an interesting win loss. I came up with a little win loss record for the good guys and the bad guys, according to Wikipedia, who of course are according to other sources. 145 official conclusive battles up to the point of Gettysburg. Um, Obviously not all wins are equal, but I kind of did just a quick little wiki count, seeing how many the good guys won and how many the bad guys. United States, guys, you guys want to take a guess? How many battles of those 145 did the red, white, and blue win?
70.
Wait. One out of one. What? How many battles?
145.
I would guess 60.
Yeah, both reasonable guesses. 88 USA.
Hmm.
Rebs, it's not 145 minus 88, for whoever can do that quickly in your head, 57. Because there were some, that were like a tie or something like that. But anyway, we did pretty solid with that. So 88 wins to something significantly less than that. Um, Let me throw out little fun facts because hey, it's always hard figuring out where fun facts go. Pope Pius the Ninth received a visit from one of the Confederate ambassadors who was not Catholic, nor was Matt's namesake Catholic. Um, Pius actually insisted that the Confederacy promise gradual emancipation, presumably if he was to recognize it as an international power or something. Prussia donated several officers. I could not gather exactly why, but they did. Um, the South it thought very highly of its cotton. Maybe a little bit too highly. Maybe if it had been a highly perishable product, they could have been a little bit more relied upon or needed. But from what I was reading, Britain, other European countries they just knew how to manage their cotton. They had a built up big enough supply that they were able to not be as concerned with reduced cotton shipments during the war. Confederate diplomats described as inexperienced and clumsy. Um, I enjoyed this fact. The Confederacy, so Abraham Lincoln was criticized for suspending habeas corpus, which I don't, I don't know exactly what that means, but something to the effect of having to a right to like a trial and stuff like that, right? The Confederacy, Matt, did you have something? Oh, oh no. The Confederacy suspended habeas corpus twice. Another fun fact from the war: the Confederacy started the draft, and so the North started the draft in response to that. So yeah, thank the Confederacy for starting the draft. Um, let's see. Make sure we remember this for later. 1880s first rebel monument went up in Gettysburg, actually. So anyway, that's just a little bit of fun fact, setting us up for the war. U.S. is winning. A lot of lives lost, and a lot of interesting tidbits. Have any of you guys been to Gettysburg?
A long time ago. Yeah.
That's probably a trick question because we all went there together.
I was wondering where you were going to go with that, Mike, but all right.
Right, yes. To put some interesting texture to that commentary, I first, in response to Ross, remembered Ross, and then about 9 seconds later, I remembered Matt being there. It was a good trip.
Glad it was memorable, even if 9 seconds later.
And can we hear a little bit from our audience why we were out at Gettysburg?
Yeah, so we have a friend, Mr. Father now, Daniel McShane, who is studying in seminary to become a priest, out in Maryland. So we went out to visit him, because we were all had graduated college at that point, and it was a great trip, to kind of make it a little not hit home more, but just to try to get a little deeper into Gettysburg. We spent a lot of time there. I remember we drove around, and it wasn't just like listen to the cassette tape. We would actually stop at each point and get out and talk about what happened here. What do you think the Confederate troops were thinking? What do you think the Union troops were thinking? And try to kind of get a sense of what did it look like? What did it feel like? Um, which worked for like 75% of the tour. And then by the last 25%, I remember I was pretty tired. But I also remember I think we read some speeches by figures, different figures, the major players at Gettysburg, I guess, went like kind of at different places where they their moments took place.
Do you guys remember what speeches Father Danny assigned to you?
I just happened to have it right here,
No
Mike.
way. Holy
Whip
smokes.
that right out. I read a letter from Robert E. Lee to his wife following the Confederate loss.
Could you share a little bit of that?
Yeah, sure. So I just happened to have it. So just to give it a little context, so the South did lose the battle. I know we're not quite there yet, but it wasn't, at least by Lee, immediately seen as a devastating loss. But anyway, so I'll just read a little tidbit. The consequences of war are horrid enough at best, surrounded by all the ameliorations of civilization and Christianity. I am very sorry for the injuries done the family at Hickory Hill, and particularly that our dear old Uncle Williams in his 80th year should be subjected to such treatment. Though we cannot help it and must endure it. You will, however, learn before this reaches you that our success at Gettysburg was not so great as reported. In fact, that we failed to drive the enemy from his position and that our army withdrew to the Potomac. Had the river not unexpectedly risen, all would have been well with us, but God in his all-wise providence willed otherwise, and our communications have been interrupted and almost cut off. And then he says some other just kind of not boring stuff, but particular stuff. And it's interesting. He says at the end, I trust that a merciful God, our only hope and refuge, will not desert us in this hour of our need, and will deliver us by his almighty hand, that the whole world may recognize his power and all hearts be lifted up in adoration and praise of his unbounded loving kindness. We must, however, submit to his almighty will, whatever that may be. May God guide and protect us all, is my constant prayer. So anyway, that's a little excerpt from a letter he wrote to his wife, but obviously things didn't go well for them, but I think in the immediate aftermath, at least, he did not view it as like I think we'll probably talk later. I mean, Gettysburg is kind of seen as a turning point in the Civil War, but at least in the immediate aftermath, I don't think that's necessarily how Lee viewed it.
I like that line. Ameliorizations of civilization and Christianity. Man. Matt,
Ross?
do you remember your speech?
So, well, I was going to say, ask Ross if he had, because I know there was like a whole, like, paper thing that Danny made. I remember I remember my speech was a priest who was on the field, like on the battlefield, of Gettysburg, like I guess tending to, the soldiers and whatnot. I can't say I recall like specifics, but you found it?
I don't have yours.
Oh, I thought you were holding it up.
No, I don't have. I have several, but I do not have that one. I remember you reading it. It was pretty cool. I think there's a statue there, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But I don't have. I don't have that speech.
Yeah,
I've just got a couple.
Yeah, and I don't know if Danny knew this at the time, but at the time I was considering the priesthood. Eventually I did go into seminary, and I remember reading that, or like just having that speech assigned to me. I didn't know, I can't remember if Danny knew I was thinking about it or not, but I don't know. I remember that was kind of like a little like
Your head
goosebumpy
was
type of
probably
thing.
spinning.
Like, what does this mean? But yeah, I ended up going to the seminary, not strictly because of that or anything, but I do remember, yeah, having like a lot of feelings, I guess, just reading that speech.
Do we have any numbers on how long was the Battle of Gettysburg? How many lives were lost, et cetera, et cetera? Why were both armies even there? Getting away from generalities that, well, one side saw it as a good strategy. What do we got on that, folks?
Yeah, so I got a couple things. So kind of like we said, Lee had kind of some confidence there after the Battle of Chancellorsville, which I believe you could correct me. That was the one where it was such an impressive like strategic point by Lee, I think, where he defeated a lot of Union soldiers. Like he was outnumbered and still won and got a good win. Um, but anyway, I don't think there's like one defining reason why, at least I know of, why Lee and the South decided to kind of do this second campaign to invade the North, but they have kind of several reason, like you can kind of look up, there's several thoughts about why they would have wanted to do it. So first of all, just a lot of fighting had been done in the South. So to try to get the fighting away from the South and into the North, kind of is just as a discouragement for the Northern forces. It's obviously a lot, I mean, hits home a little harder when you're literally fighting on your doorstep. Trying to force Lincoln into some negotiations if they can win some decisive battles in the North and potentially in the war. Other people there's thoughts that it was to try to convince other nations to recognize the Confederacy. Um, like the morale was high. It seemed like a good point. And also just, we'll talk about it later, I'm sure, but, there was a lot of Union forces sieging, Vicksburg, and there was thought that maybe it could have drawn some forces away, from Vicksburg. So all kinds of reasons why the South wanted to invade the North, yeah, leading up to the Battle of Gettysburg, and then the North's kind of, I guess, response to that. This is kind of where the two forces met.
So they, right. So the South, for whatever reason, is starting this campaign. Um, they meet in Gettysburg. Was this, I guess, fill in, like, how big were the sides? How many troops from each side were there? Like, just, yeah, I guess a little bit more detail would be
I
nice,
got
just to
that.
kind of get the
I got that.
grandeur and size.
I got that. We got on the Yankees 85,000. On the Reds 65,000. So 85,000 versus 65,000.
That's a lot
Real,
of people.
real quick, can I
I
just,
mean,
I almost want to do, so I looked up the population of the United States at this time was 31 million. That's like a pretty big percent of the population are in this battle.
Yeah. So relative to like today's population, that's about 10% of today's populations. That would be like 650,000 versus 850,000 in today's as a percent of population. Crazy. One rebel regiment completely killed in this battle.
like
Crazy.
100%.
100%. Man, that'd be terrifying. My memories of Gettysburg, I obviously went there once with you guys, and once with my parents, when I was a senior in high school. And I don't know how this compares to other battlefields, especially those from that time period, but I remember feeling like it was very spread out, like it had a large variety of topography. A lot of huge boulders, some wood cover, some open area, and I don't know. I don't know necessarily what that means, but it just has that sort of texture to it. I suppose that's interesting.
Yeah, I remember just walking through the field and thinking like, if I was just here, like whatever position I happen to be in, like what the hell would I do? Just because like a large portion of it is just wide open. And yeah, I mean, it's not like I don't know what the gun capability was at the time, but yeah, I mean, I remember that was the first time I'd been on like a real battlefield, at least that I remember. I think I'd visited something like that when I was young and didn't give a care. But yeah, I guess that
You
the
know,
humanity of that situation really struck me just seeing it.
okay, if you took us right now and put us in that environment, like, 10 minutes before battle, you give us all the gear, we put on the cotton outfits, wool outfits, and we'd be terrified. We'd be a bunch of Nancys. We might even run away. God forbid. But I think if we had grown up in that environment, understood sort of how things evolve, I'd like to think that we'd hold our own. My hypothesis is that obviously in the environment that we're in now, we take virtue pretty seriously. We take strength seriously, courage, so relative to our like peers today, we score pretty high in those things. Not compared to your average like pioneer, but relative to our peers. So I guess what I'm getting at is if we had grown up then, we'd probably be generals. Yeah, I mean,
With that, oh yeah, with
well, I
that,
don't know. One last bit to put a fine point on that. I remember that's related. I remember asking my grandpa Schaefer, who fought in World War II, when he was, he was drafted. I was like, Grandpa, like, were you scared going off the war? And obviously that's different than like right before a battle, but he said, no, I mean, everyone was doing it, so you didn't think too much of it. So I think that, when everyone is doing it, when everyone in your world is in the space of a battle, I think that makes things, a little bit less intimidating than we might imagine, sitting here with our whiskey and such.
yeah, yeah, no, it does something to your heart, I'd imagine. Yeah. So we've got 85,000 on the north. How many again on the south?
65,000.
65,000. And we're in the early part of July, 1863. What happens next? How does the battle unfold? What are the big moves that are made?
It's hard to say any of the days like weren't major, obviously, because I mean there's fighting and death and going on. But at least to not get too, I guess, particular. Like I think day one, I don't want to say the word jockeying for position, but the South is pushing into Northern forces and trying to drive them back and out of Gettysburg. And I think overall did a pretty good job. And we can talk about it more, but maybe just some lack of aggressiveness by certain people or poor leadership by certain Confederates, they kind of allowed the Union to set up a very strong defensive position. So something we'll probably talk about a little bit is just part of why people speculate why maybe the South lost is kind of the performance of General Lee's subordinates. So kind of some of his the people kind of still high up in the Confederate Army, but that had to make some decisions underneath of Lee didn't do a very good job. So a lot of people actually think that had Stonewall Jackson not died after Chancellorsville, that the South could have won at Gettysburg because of Lee was kind of known for making, I guess you could say generalizations, but like kind of general orders and leaving it then up to subordinates. And whereas Stonewall Jackson was known for being quite aggressive with those and doing very well and was very successful. Uh, so I think what was Cemetery Hill was like a ridge south of town. And Lee said something to the effect, I don't have the quote in front of me, but like take it if it, he didn't say take it if it makes sense, but if the opportunity arises, something to the effect of that. And his general said, no, I don't think we should. The Union forces are too strong there, and that let them set up this super strong position. Where a lot of people speculate that had Stonewall Jackson still been alive, he would have taken Cemetery Hill at the end of day one. But anyway, so day one, I think, was a lot of getting the South's kind of driving at the North, but the North setting up solid defensive battlefield positions.
I'm looking at a map of day 2 of the battle here. Man, we were surrounded by the rebels. I got nothing else to add on that, but now you at least know we were surrounded on day 2.
We were surrounded.
Emphasis on the we.
Yeah, by the way, we're all on the northern side of this war. If
there's a headstone. I know I told you guys this, but I have not told our listeners. There's a headstone right off of Highway 136 between Interstate 70 and Charleston, Illinois. If you're next time you are on your way up to Fox Ridge State Park to go camping and you want to take the scenic route, head up Highway 136. There's a neat little cemetery on your left, about 6 miles south of Fox Ridge near Lincoln's father's home. And there's a headstone whose epitaph reads, "A Northern Yankee who helped save the Union." Oh, gosh. What a great headstone. You guys remember me sharing that?
no,
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember.
Really? You don't remember that?
I don't remember it.
I've heard him say that at least 3 times. I mean, it's a cool thing to say. I think it's worth saying at least twice. So, I mean.
Well, and then this third time was for our listeners.
Well, this is the 4th time, so I mean, it's a little overkill at this point.
Well, man, I wasn't saying it for you. The third time is probably someone. Or I probably had a couple too many beers, and I started getting a little more patriotic.
That's what happened.
Mm-hmm. So how do we get out of this? We're surrounded on day 2, Mike.
Yeah.
What did we do?
We need Steve here. Day 3, Battle of Gettysburg. Okay, Google image. Okay, we have Battle of Gettysburg first day. That's what came up first. We're surrounded. We're surrounded on the first day as well. We're surrounded on the first day. We know we're surrounded on the second day. Come on, give me a third day. Or maybe a third day like hardly counts. Like it ended at 1 a.m. and so they just never really. Oh my goodness. And you guys should check out this map. This one's labeled the Battle of Gettysburg, the bloodshed of Gettysburg. I said we are surrounded in those other 2 references. This one, we are surrounded. Man, we were extraordinary.
Are you looking at, is that like the fish hook or whatever? Is that the picture you're talking about?
That was one of the maps I was looking at. The one I'm looking at now is the bloodshed of Gettysburg.weebly.com.
That sounds just a lot like bloodshed. I mean, and weep. I don't know what you said, but it sounded like weep. Just sounded sad.
Yeah. Weebly.
Weebly. Sorry.
All right. It sounds like we may or may not know how exactly we got out of it. The important thing is that we did. And so what's the aftermath, the immediate aftermath? What did this do to springboard the Union into glory and victory? Like what's I guess that might be something.
We just can't just jump straight. We didn't even talk about Pickett's charge. We haven't talked about anything.
Well, that's what I mean.
There's 3 days. Just because we don't do this.
Let me manage the content. You deliver the content.
So how do we get to FDR? What happened there?
Hey, what's going on with Pickett's charge there? I like what I heard there. Let's put some meat in our bones.
So day 2 didn't go as well as General Lee had wanted, because you got to remember that the South is kind of on the offensive here. They were the ones invading the North. They were the ones that, as Mike has told us several times, had surrounded the Union troops. So day 2 didn't go as planned. Again, I think people debate whether or not Lee should have taken more of a micromanaging strategy or just his subordinates didn't do a very good job. But I think some of his orders, like he wanted somebody to attack very early in the morning and got delayed by like a lot of hours, which again allowed the Union troops to set up stronger defensive positions. I think his cavalry, I don't know if as a general, but leader, a guy named Stuart, had gone really far north and didn't even get there till day 3. So Lee didn't have as much of the information that maybe he could have had. So he's attacking, and it's just not it's not able to kind of take over. So he kind of orders on the 3rd day, which is I believe July 3rd, 1863. He orders what's known as Pickett's Charge, which was actually even in the moment controversial. I believe Longstreet, I think was his name, but one of the higher ups, still underneath Lee, but higher ups Confederates he just didn't think it was a good idea. But pretty much he ordered a offensive maneuver. I'm trying to look up the numbers here, but it was led by a guy named Pickett, and they literally just charged they had to cross. I mean, you can see it when you're at Gettysburg. I think it's a couple hundred yards, and pretty much just charged at the Union forces. And that point was the furthest. That's called the high water mark. So that's the furthest. That's the deepest into the north the South ever got. So the charge is named after Major General George Pickett, he's one of the 3 generals who led the assault. So Lee thought that there was a weak point there and they could break through. Obviously did not work. So I'm trying to look here. So General Pickett's charge looks like 10,000 men he sent, which seems again just massive amounts. They did kind of an artillery barrage to try to weaken the Union forces before they sent them all in. In the force of Pickett's charge, they sent about 12,500 men. Though it was actually it wasn't a charge. They weren't running screaming. They were marching forward, and weren't supposed to charge, so they got a little bit closer. But still, just the fact, 12,000 men just start marching across the battlefield to try to break through is pretty intimidating. I'm still looking up. I can't get how far they had to go, but it was quite a distance. So, I don't know if you'd say it's a suicide mission, but obviously it did not work. That was Pickett's charge.
Based on the map I'm looking at, it looks about 3/4 of a mile. So pretty good distance.
So, talking about that, can you imagine, all right, 3/4 of a mile over, I wouldn't say flat ground, but, you're they could have been shooting at you. Just to say, all right, let's go, boys. Sounds pretty intense. It would have been hard to muster up the courage to just do that.
Yeah, that's like a 8-minute walk or so? March, whatever, I don't know what pace they're going at, but
right.
Yeah, it's about 8 minutes.
Some of these men might have also been fighting. I don't know the specific ones that were sent, if they were there all 3 days or not, but it's not like you woke up fresh from 8 hours of sleep, ate a healthy breakfast, drank a cup of coffee, and then got to do your 8-minute walk. You know what I mean? It would have been quite tough.
I wonder how much the guys even knew what they were going into. Obviously we have this hindsight and, can look at all the maps and such, but, maybe, what was better for it, I think what I'd probably prefer, is obviously not knowing exactly what, I was going up against, in the given moment, but. While the boys are kind of thinking about the next. Oh.
This is, so the conclusion of day 3. So obviously Pickett's charge doesn't go well. The South is not able to take Gettysburg, and ends up having to retreat. What do you think Lincoln would have happened then immediately after? Just let him go home and hang out in the South?
Counterattack.
Yeah, that's a great question. What did Lincoln want?
I think Matt just told us.
Well, I know, counterattack. I know, I'm feeding the drama. Yeah. Yeah. How would you go, in enemies running away? How do you go about chasing after them? Because how I'd imagine it is that, okay, that means you'd have to just keep chasing them, or I don't know, go to bed, and they've been on the run for 8 hours, and then you just chase after them harder. Okay, so yeah, so do you guys know what that counterattack looked like?
I
Well, there
don't.
there wasn't a major one, right? Wasn't that why Lincoln was upset?
I'm looking up right now.
So I'm pretty
Battle of
sure like
Gettysburg.
Meade did not pursue like he not that he like let him escape intentionally, but like Meade didn't go super aggressively after Lee following the Battle of Gettysburg, which allowed him to march back into the South with still a pretty good sized army. And wasn't Lincoln pretty upset that he didn't like aggressively go after him?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely sounds familiar. But gosh, how can you blame the poor guy? I mean, you just had, um, how many people where's our numbers here? How many people just died? Um, 51,000 casualties, 23,000 Union deaths, 23,000 Confederates. No, those were casualties. 3,000 and 4,700 killed. God, man, that would just to endure all of that and then go and chase after more blood. Huh. That is a tall order for sure. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Speaking of just kind of, I guess, before we get too much more into the speech and the effects of the aftermath, like Lincoln's speech itself, but to kind of obviously we're not super good at the Battle of Gettysburg, but we know our stuff. But the Battle of Little Round Top, which I think was day 2, the day we couldn't think of what happened, I think that's a pretty well known, famous battle. I think from a little bit of reading I did, and I think there's again a little bit of debate over how important it was. I think some people think it was a crucial point of the battle. Other people think not so much because it even had the South won that part of it. It wouldn't have had a huge effect. But anyway, there was a little round top. I think it was the western part of this the line. I hope that's right. Is just a famous battle where it was very fierce. A lot of fighting went on. So we've talked a lot about if we had been there, what it would have been like, and it would have been hard to march across the field and do Pickett's charge. I have a little excerpt about from this is firsthand accounts, gentlemen, from the Battle of Little Round Top. So we got a guy named Joseph Chamberlain. He was kind of one of the Union leaders at Little Round Top. So here is, I'll just read it. As the 20th Maine center began to break and give ground in the face of the Alabama regiment's onslaught, 25-year-old Sergeant Tozier stood firm, remaining upright as Southern bullets buzzed and snapped in the air around him. Tozier's personal gallantry in defending the 20th Maine's colors became the regimental rallying point for companies D, E, and F to retake the center. Were it not for Tozier's heroic stand, the 20th Maine would likely have been beaten at that decisive point in the battle. When their ammunition had almost run out, Chamberlain decided to fix bayonets and charge down into the 2 Alabama regiments. Chamberlain, whose right foot had been pierced by a shell fragment, limped along the regimental line yelling out instructions. Chamberlain ordered a right wheel maneuver with one word: bayonets. Chamberlain led the men down the slope when the enemy was only 30 yards away. First Lieutenant Holman S. Melker broke a momentary hesitation by running down the slope screaming, "Come on! Come on, boys!" Chamberlain seemed to have been blessed with both good timing and luck. He not only made the right command decisions, but also managed to survive. Blah, blah, blah. An Alabama soldier twice failed to pull the trigger because he had second thoughts about killing him, and then a pistol aimed by a Southern officer misfired a few feet from his face. So, anyway, I just thought that was powerful. The fact that, 30 yards is not very far. And you have literally an army full of people looking at you. You can see people at 30 yards. Trying to kill you, and your response is to sprint at them yelling, "Come on, boys." That takes that takes some balls. I'll say it. I would like to think that would have been me, but I probably would have been hesitating.
And I remember hearing stories in the Civil War in particular about like it wasn't just like your 18 to 22-year-old men who were fighting. Like you had 40-year-olds and you had 14-year-olds, which just, yeah, all of these stories just with that in mind too. Like, it's just like, holy smokes.
Or even like Mike, when you said like, kind of not knowing what's about to happen. If your commander is yelling bayonets, I think we got an idea of what's about to happen here. But anyway, yeah, just to kind of, yeah, probably a very ugly day to have actually been there.
Okay. Battle ends. Now it's time for some branding. They started in 1863 and we're still doing it today. Let's make sure that history remembers this the right way. Let's make sure that Twitter gets it right. So Lincoln was not the only speaker that day at Gettysburg. Who else was speaking that day?
Ross, were you trying to say something? Because you're muted.
Well, Lincoln probably had like the longest, most center speech of the day, right? Had to have been.
Had to have been. Wrong. Wrong. So the I don't know, keynote speaker, if you will, was actually not Lincoln. So the Gettysburg
What?
Address, I know, jaw dropper. So the keynote or the main speech, so the Gettysburg Address, so to speak, was supposed to be, and I mean, it was delivered by a man named Edward Everett. So Edward Everett, at the time was known as just a very prestigious public speaker. Throughout his life, he'd held a number of, positions that I think if any one of us held any one of these positions for any period of time, we would count our lives crazy successful. And he held all of these, including president of Harvard, ambassador to the United Kingdom, U.S. House representative for the state of Massachusetts, the governor of Massachusetts, and the Secretary of State. Fairly accomplished man. He taught at Harvard for a while. Ralph Waldo Emerson was one of his students who apparently idolized Everett for his speaking eloquence. At the time of Gettysburg, he was retired from public life and politics, but he was still on the speaking circuit. His last major run in politics was actually, he was the vice president for the Constitutional Union Party in the 1860 election. So this was during Lincoln's first election, during which he had the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates and all that. So John Bell was the president on that ticket, Edward Everett vice president. Constitutional Union Party was basically just keep the United States a union at all costs. We're kind of wishy-washy on slavery, kind of, I don't know, compromising on that regard. Obviously, they lost. Lincoln won. Interesting note, during the campaign, Edward Everett said of Lincoln's speeches that he made during that campaign, quote, "These speeches thus far have been of the most ordinary kind, destitute of everything, not merely felicity of grace, but of common pertinence. He is evidently a person of inferior cast of character, wholly unequal to the crisis." That was 1860. Fast forward, Edward Everett ended up supporting Lincoln in the 1864 election. Ended up being much more of much more supportive of abolition and things like that. So at this time he was docked to be the main speaker. His speech was similar in Lincoln's in terms of trying to emphasize this historical significance. He made comparisons to ancient Greece and some of the battles there and, their struggle for democracy. Also emphasized reverence for the dead. There's a slight difference in length of their speeches. So Edward Everett's was 13,000 words, over 13,000 words, I think 13,600 something. Abraham Lincoln's was, I think, something like 170 something words. I don't know. Very, very short. In fact, Edward Everett's first sentence was about 20% of Lincoln's entire speech in terms of the number of words.
Was it a run-on sentence?
Sounds like it probably was. So anyway, I read parts of his speech. Very well written, like very well. You can like imagine someone like delivering this with a lot of passion.
Can you share a couple of the snippets?
So I don't have them on hand, unfortunately. So we'll just cut that from the edited version. So moving forward, in the immediate aftermath, so the day after the speech, so Edward Everett would not have had a chance. This isn't Twitter where everyone reacts immediately.
Sorry,
right?
When is the speech? How long after the war was the speech? You said the day after, but when was the speech?
Yeah. So the speech was November. Shoot, what was the date? I can't remember the date. November 14th, I believe.
Okay, so like 4 months, just over a little.
Yeah,
okay.
About 4 months after the war. I'm sorry, the battle. So Edward Everett heard Lincoln's speech, obviously. So Edward Everett delivers this 2-hour, 13,000 word thing. Abraham Lincoln comes up. Like Mike said, the people barely had time to get their cameras out before he sat down and delivered a speech that is infinitely more famous than Edward Everett's. And Everett responded before he ever got a chance to see any newspapers or anything like that. This isn't the Twitter zone where people react live and in color. He wrote to Lincoln, "I should be glad if I could flatter myself that I came as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes." Lincoln had kind of an interesting response. Basically, well, I'll just read a short quote. "In our respective parts yesterday, you could not have been excused to make a short address, nor I a long one. I'm pleased to know that you, in your judgment, the little that I did say was not entirely a failure." I don't know, just nice little humility by Lincoln. It's kind of a cute little, not cute, that's not the right word. I don't know, just a very like honest, simple kind of response. Endearing. That's the word. Nice.
I'm reading your notes here. The second contrast point, Lincoln bypassed the argument and, I guess I first have to read this point. Everett focused on dismantling arguments of the Confederacy and was sharply critical of politics opposing the Union cause. Lincoln bypassed the argument and assumed the convictions of the Union were correct, noble, and worth fighting for. He focused on transcendental principles and looked beyond historical particulars. Yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting. It just sounds like something melancholic would say, like, shut up with your, bantering about little details. This is just simply how it is, and don't make any drama of it. Ladies and gentlemen, by now, your whiskey glass is probably getting a little low, and we have a message from our sponsors. Tullamore Dew, the whiskey that you need on your own speech nights. Get it at your local tavern for $59.99. Get it for your sweetheart for Valentine's Day. Get it for your bros on your biannual camp out here. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not cheap to make this show, so please run, don't walk to your favorite liquor store and buy the biggest bottle of Tullamore Dew that your credit card can muster. Thank you, Tullamore Dew, for sponsoring this episode. And Matt, we're back to Edmund Everett.
And you're welcome, Tullamore Dew, for that free advertising. To my knowledge, they actually haven't paid us anything.
And now that we've hyped up an Irish whiskey, let's talk about the importance of the Civil War in the United States of America.
Well, the last note about, it isn't so much about Edward Everett, but more or less the immediate interpretation and reception of Lincoln's speech. It's just interesting that pretty much like the reception was very much along partisan lines, which is something I think we can all relate to today. Interesting quote from the Chicago Times. The cheek of every American must tingle with shame as he reads the silly, flat, and dishwatery utterances of the man who has to be pointed out to the intelligent foreigners as the President of the United States. Yeah, a few other. Oh yeah, there's another paper in Massachusetts that called it, quote, deep in feeling, compact in thought and expression, and tasteful and elegant in every word and comma. But yeah, there have been a number of newspapers that have since retracted their initial condemnation of the speech as of poor quality, which is just kind of interesting that, I don't know, I guess maybe it speaks to modern times a little bit that it's not the only time in history where people are kind of divided and react poorly to the history of things. You know, I think
know
it's
when they issued that retraction?
I don't know the exact date. It says the sesquicentennial. Is that 75 years after, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, if it's centennial, then it's 100, at least 100.
I believe that
So
was
100,
150.
150 years.
150.
Yeah.
I did Google it.
So modern times. Yeah, it's interesting.
And which paper said the really mean thing again? Wait,
That
what
was
was
the
the name?
Chicago Times. I don't know if that's now the Chicago Sun-Times or
That's
I
the
assume
okay. That's
so.
where I heard it. Okay.
Um,
So my question then for you guys is why, if Lincoln gives a speech that's a couple minutes long in the middle of a career where he gave tons of famous speeches, like we've done what, like 20 speeches, 25 in our podcast at this point. Why is this the only one that I've heard? Like to the normal person, if I say, "Oh, John F. Kennedy's "We Choose to Go to the Moon" speech," they're not going to just like spit it out, right? Or some of the other ones you given. Like why is the Gettysburg Address? I mean, he gave tons of speeches. We fought a lot of wars, not to obviously minimize the Civil War, but like, why does everyone in America know exactly what you're talking about when you say the Gettysburg Address?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, it's like my mom says, it's never just one thing. I mean, I think part of it is because it is short. So, you remember one line of it that sticks out to you, and that's, 10% of the speech. Um, I mean, obviously the historical significance, yeah, is the transition point as we've kind of reminded ourselves between the U.S. sort of having to come from behind in a sense in order to take back our country. I don't know. Those couple of my thoughts, Matt.
I think a good part of it is just the person Lincoln is, and the person and the role he played in America. Um, just one, I mean, managing our country through, I mean, the biggest crisis it's ever faced. Two, I mean, emancipating slaves and being a political figure, like kind of the main political figure in the abolition of slavery. Um, I mean, I think all of that adds a lot of context, more so than just, I think, simply the words. Certainly, it's like very powerful speech. Um, Definitely like captures the grandeur and transcendence of like this battle and the significance of the war itself. But yeah, I mean, I would say it probably has more to do with Lincoln himself. If a different president gave a similarly worded speech in a moment that wasn't as big, like I don't know if it would be remembered as well. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would say it's definitely the man and the circumstance, I think, that make this really profound.
Yeah, I feel like of what we're trying. It seems like what we're trying to capture here with speech night is like, how did these speeches, like, we're not just trying to look at the history of like we're not just trying to look at the history of like, oh, what speech did this president give in this year, and what did that mean for the political scene at the time? Like, we're just not trying to write a history book, right? But we're also like, we're trying to look at these speeches that had an impact on people and maybe what we can glean from it today. And I don't know, it just seems like of all the ones we've done so far, this one might be the one that sticks out the most, at least to me. And I don't know, I just think it's hard to articulate, but like I think it's powerful, I guess. Like just what backs up the speech. Like I mean, the line, like right, what he says, like in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggle here have consecrated it. Like I don't know, like you listen to a political speech by a president or something like. A lot of times, I think they're dealing in, they're kind of dealing in ideas or thoughts. So this would work, this wouldn't work, but like I mean, Lincoln Speaks literally alludes to it. Like, it's the people who literally fought and died for the cause that makes it powerful, I think, too.
One thing I think that he does well, I think he connects the dead and honors the dead, but also brings into, kind of stirs up the living, you know, just
Mm-hmm.
about like we're carrying forward the great task that remains before it, like he doesn't use those exact words. It's kind of paraphrasing, um, but yeah, like, yeah, we should take increased devotion to the cause. We should take increased devotion to, um, everything that America is. And gosh, it really is such a cool thought that, where does he say it? That, the Civil War is testing that whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Just because like America is such a big experiment, and we are less than 100 years in, and it's like, shoot, maybe this is it, you know, um, maybe this is the end of that democracy and that, um, yeah, everything that the founding fathers thought would be these kind of eternal principles. So yeah, I just think the connection between the dead, the living, and like the eternal principles and like all of the transcendent, um, yeah, the transcendent, I don't know, factors or meaning behind the battle. Yeah, I think he just brings it out really well.
Yeah, I mean, like looking at it again, and well said, Matt, but like just the last sentence, like when he says like you said, like to honors and remembers the dead, but to kind of like make a call to the living, like those of us that are still here. Like, I mean, that last sentence, they gave the last full measure of devotion that we here highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth, freedom, and that the government of people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish in the earth. Like, maybe it's too romantic of me, but like when I hear that, like thinking about like, yeah, these dead shall not have died in vain, like it just kind of makes you want to stand up and be like, yeah, let's go. Which is interesting because one of the theories or thoughts about like Lee invading the North was to try to demoralize the North. You know, he had the kind of the morale there was high morale in the South at the time after Chancellorsville, and they had this big strong army, and Lee was this invincible general, and blah blah blah. But yet, Lincoln's words there, at least now, and I don't know, like you said, it was maybe not quite as universally accepted at the time, but seemed to be a rallying cry for those of them still behind.
So how do we take up the mantle? How do we answer Lincoln's call to preserve the Union?
Hey, is that the finishing question? Are you taking my finishing question? You
Is that
can't
the
have
finishing
two.
question? I didn't hear it. I didn't see it
Well,
written.
I was trying to think of one, but that's good
Oh,
enough. But if I think of another one, we can use that. But
okay.
that works. We can run with that a little bit, see what happens. How do we answer the call of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address to honor those who died there? I can think of a couple of different branches we can sort of run with based off of that question. Confederate monuments. Is that a way to honor the lives that were lost at Gettysburg and the Civil War in general? What do you guys think?
Not to get too political here, Mike.
Hey, it was Matt's question.
I think that's actually a hard question, personally, because I honestly, like, I get the fact that, Like, at least how you posed it here. So not just jumping into the political thought of, the last couple years of, tearing down statues and things, but like, on one hand, like, yeah, I get that totally that, the Civil War was a huge part of it was slavery. So like, why in the world would you honor the people who fought for slavery? It doesn't make any sense. But then at the same time, like, when you look at like American death tolls during the Civil War, like, it includes the South. It's like, if you wanted to, like, they were also like the people who died from the South, like, were Americans. Um, so it's an interesting thing, like, what to do about, and I guess maybe it's different when you're talking about the generals and the leaders, but like, and I guess these people don't have statues, so maybe it doesn't answer the question well, but like, how should we think about the Southerner, just the random people that got pulled into it, like, should we honor them? Do they deserve it? Like, were they bad guys and traitors, or were they just, Americans? Um, so maybe it's kind of balancing it, but I feel like that's a difficult question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can forget the past, and I don't know that every monument is necessarily an approval of everything that every person did and supported. Um, so in that sense, like, yeah, why not leave them up? Like, remember whatever, but at the same time, like, I could see it being like, yeah, that's kind of a disturbing thing to have in a public square, especially, um, yeah, in a world where there's still like racial disparity, in a world where there's still, yeah, racists out there, and like how that, yeah, I mean, those have been a rallying, those people and the Confederate imagery, like, still is a rallying cry for evil, in some circles. So yeah, I could see like taking them out of public places. Like, that seems like it might be I would be fine. I guess that wouldn't bother me, but, I don't know, if you throw them in a museum where people can remember, like, okay, like, this is not a good part of our past, but it's something we need to, yeah, something we need to remember, cause this is a real thing and this is a real phase in, American history. Um, I don't know. I guess to me, that seems reasonable.
So we said the first rebel monument went up in Gettysburg. And according to the quote here we have in the notes, immediately Union veterans denounced and opposed it as disgracing their service. Just an interesting little tidbit.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the tidbit that I had discovered there. Found was pretty interesting. I mean, I think that the Confederate monument question it has a few different layers that can be worth thinking through. I think that often today, so maybe we can start sort of modern day. Modern day, keeping Confederate monuments up, it can sort of be a little bit of a um signaling by conservatives to, yeah, remember past, that's how things were. That's not how they are now, but that's where they're at. Um, so that's sort of like one layer to it. The another layer, of course, is seeing them as symbols of, sort of celebrating, not necessarily celebrating slavery, but celebrating something that obviously stood for slavery. Um, and then I'd say the third layer is this sort of lost cause sort of sentiment where, I think there's a reality, of course, that the South did lose something other than slavery. They did sort of lose their culture. That's not obviously not to say that, of course, that like, oh boy, it would have been better if they won or something like that, or what, things happened the way they did, and it was good. It's good that the South lost, but there are externalities to everything, and their economy, well, not exactly rightly or wrongly, it was definitely wrongly, but there were families and lives that were built on slavery society. So when you remove slaves, there's just this utter destabilization of a society that people want to remember in a positive way, and it's hard to fault them for that. Um, I think that that's sort of where the sort of sentiment for these Confederate monuments comes from, in the most sort of like sincere way. So I don't know. Before I keep rambling, what do you guys think of some
I
of
think,
those thoughts or layers?
yeah, I
Real
think that's,
quick,
oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
that was probably the most, I don't know. So I've interacted with a number of Southerners who are very vitriolic, even towards Lincoln in some degrees. Um, Not in like a pro-slavery way, but just for other things. And they mentioned habeas corpus, whatnot. But Mike, that was probably the clearest explanation of everything that they've said that Southerners have mentioned about like the culture and like just things that I've ever heard. And that was interesting coming from a Yankee. So I don't know. That was really good, Mike.
So, couple thoughts I had. So, first of all, I'm just going to do it. We shouldn't podcast scared. So, any of you guys listening that are trying to start a podcast someday, never podcast scared. I don't want anyone to think we're dancing around the question. It's
Never.
complicated. It's hard. But if I'm a politician and it's like, hey, Ross, you have to vote here. Yeah, it's hard and complex and there's layers, but like, do the statues come down or stay up? I think I'd vote take them down. Reason being, I think you can't, like, I'm not saying Robert E. Lee's evil, and I get that George Washington had slaves. But when you put up a statue of George Washington, you're not trying to say, oh yeah, he had slaves. You're trying to put him up as the leader of like the leader that got our country started. And I feel like too much of the sentiment around the South, that's where it'd be. So anyway, if I had to pick, that's where I'd go. But to kind of jump more into what Mike said and his thoughts about, Matt's question about, so how do we take up the call of Lincoln? I think maybe it says something about the beauty of the speech is just how many ways you can take it. So like, I feel like a lot of people would read this and come up to a very different answer. So if you're looking at, a huge point, I would say honestly, maybe the largest point of the North was to keep the Union together, right? So Lincoln even himself wasn't this, always just pro, we have to end slavery right now person, but like keeping the United States together was such a huge part of the war. Like, yeah, like we kept the United States together, like no ifs, ands, or buts. So in a lot of ways, we did honor the cause that they took up. But at the same time, like someone else I think could look at it and say, well, yeah, but like clearly slavery was a huge part of the Civil War. So, saying these men will not have died in vain, and yet, 150 some years later, we still have racial disparities. Maybe we haven't done the best job, in taking up the call of Lincoln. So anyway, I just think that that's part of the beauty of the speech. And I guess that's a takeaway from Mike's eloquent discussion about why, maybe the Southern pride still exists, even outside of slavery. But I think those are all just interesting thoughts about a very short speech. One more thought I had. So, not I stole from someone. Like, say the South wins the war. Like, they would have ended slavery eventually, right? I'm assuming.
Yeah, I asked this question to the guy giving tours at Lincoln's house at some point. Well, I asked a similar question. It was, if the Civil War had not happened, when would slavery have ended? And he said something like, probably like 1900 or so, because he referenced something like economic conditions, that would have fostered the end of slavery.
Because like multiple European powers had already ended slavery before the Civil War, correct?
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So it's
I
not
mean,
like
like
we were like
late.
the first ones that had the idea that like, hey, we shouldn't have slaves.
Yeah, I mean, it's like late 1700s that Britain ended slavery, so you have to assume something similar for the other European countries. Yeah. Oh, I mean, slavery obviously exists in other countries today, not in developed countries, but I don't know. I mean, does slavery still, I mean, I think it exists more than we, as with a lot of things, so it sort of has to sort of go undercover. Now, I don't know how you exactly make a bunch of African Americans picking cotton before you go undercover. Okay, here's my quick
I mean, it
thinking.
happens. It happens in like weird industries like sex slavery and drug
Yeah.
I
mules and
doubt
whatever.
it still exists in the way it did then. I mean, I'm not gonna like literally look up every country's constitution, but like if a country literally was like, yeah, you can buy and sell people, I'm pretty sure we would have gotten into war with them by now.
The UN would put a kibosh on that. Yeah. Um, I don't, I guess my most logical, short, quick answer is once a new technology. Okay, let's say a new technology would have come up in 1900 that would have made human picking of cotton unnecessary. Then what would the relationship of African Americans to modern society and Southern society look like? That's an interesting sort of question to think about. Yeah. I don't,
All right, so we talked a little bit like general, like politicky. So like, oh, what, like, how can we take up the cause? Like, these are the things that happen. What are like your guys' more like personal thoughts? Like, you read the Gettysburg Address. Is it like, oh yeah, I read that in school? Does it actually get you kind of excited? Does it make you think about anything in particular? Hmm. You guys sound like the Chicago Times right now.
well, I mean, I guess obviously the natural sort of come away here is, yeah, I mean, how do we, just being real, how do we, um, navigate away from racist sort of, oh, actually, here's a good little bit that I think is relevant and,
I took it a wholly different way. See, the complexity of this speech is huge.
yeah,
You
okay.
said obviously, and I was thinking it's been totally different.
um, there was okay. So where I'm going with this thought, just to be clear, is yeah. How do we be good anti-racist, but not in the traditional sense of that term today? Um, I watched a few Key and Peele videos, sort of what I do,
What
and
video?
there's this one video I watched very recently. It was almost less like being funny and sort of just being. Obviously, there are oftentimes a little bit of a balance between social commentary and humor. Um, Key and Peele's comedy videos, folks, for or folks calling in right now. Oh, screw you, Key and Peele. Um, and there's this video. Uh, it's one of the comedians, Jordan Peele, I think. And he's pretending to be a black guy walking through a subdivision full of a bunch of white people, and like there's white kids, playing outside, and he walks past this house and the mom like opens the door and like she sees this black guy walking down the street, and she like tells her kids to come in, and there's a cop who starts pulling up next to him, and Jordan Peele's character flips his hood up, and there's this sort of weird graphic. There wasn't a really easy way to do it though, but there's this graphic at the end of the video, like, oh well, the black kid puts his hood up because now the cop is going to think that it's just a white kid or something like that. So, like I said, yeah, it's not really that funny of a video. It's more just social commentary. But sort of my like thoughts, I was thinking about this when I was walking this evening. And I've heard Jordan Peele use the term microaggressions, which I'm sure you guys have heard about, but our listeners as well, being intellectual people, of course. And I wondered, like, is this considered like a microaggression in Jordan Peele's perspective? And I mean, I could see where he was coming from. That, yeah, okay, sure, you can apply that word to that. But how I think of it is that I don't think of that as aggression. That's just people being like idiots. And I mean that in like a very specific way, because it's it's this guy, it's the black guy walking down the street. Yeah, it's a little bit out of place because these people, it's mostly white neighbors, so you can't blame them. Oh, there's someone who looks different. Now, a rational person says, "Oh, someone looks different. Oh, but there's really nothing to think anything of. They're just walking down the street with hoodie. Okay, well, it's a hot day. That's a little weird, but whatever." That's it. That is a rational line of thought, right? But white people, we're nerds. We are uptight. That is our standard MO. And sadly, that is what a lot of white people do when they see someone that's unfamiliar to them. I don't know. So, how do I fight racism? By just acting normal around people who look different than me. I don't know. So that's sort of my bit. A little bit rambling, but a little bit pertinent and relevant. I don't know. So.
Maybe. Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. And I think maybe another way I've heard a similar sentiment phrased might be like, so when you're kids, so there's this little, so this was a time I was in the seminary. I was talking with this, seminarian, and a couple other guys, and this one was from Africa, right? And very, very dark skin. And this other kid's family come, and there's this little white blonde girl. Um, she just comes up to him and says, "Wow, you're really black," you know? And this is like a 3-year-old girl, just comes up and says, "Wow, you're really black." And then he just turns to her and says, "Wow, you're really white." And they just smiled and laughed at each other. And I don't know. I think everyone just kind of thought it was funny. Um, I don't know. I think there's a certain, um, overthinking that I could see being just as offensive to people. You know what I mean? Just being like overly cautious and like where it's just, you can't, it's hard to be like, have a natural friendship with someone when you're always like tiptoeing, and when you're always, um, kind of second guessing everything you say. That isn't to say that like there isn't a certain level of sensitivity, because like obviously there is. Like there are a lot of sensitive issues regarding this, but, um, and not that like, yeah, I could see certain behaviors like the white people being irrational and like telling their kids to walk inside, and they're, just because there's someone with, varying levels of melanin walking in their neighborhood. Um, it's, yeah, I mean, I think there's certain things that are certainly irritating, but I don't know. I guess I heard, so Morgan Freeman at one point was asked, like, how do you end racism? And like his response was to stop talking about it. Because to some degree we're teaching kids, you have to teach kids that like there's a difference, and that difference really, really matters a lot, because that little girl had no idea, and she just was making an observation. And like, yeah, the adults, the seminarian, from Africa, like, yeah, he just made a funny joke, and like everyone moved on and like had a really good time after that.
I like that a lot because it's like, yeah, they didn't immediately start saying like, oh, her parents must have taught her this or that. They were like, yeah, she's 3 years old. She said something silly. Make a joke, let it go. Um, and like life will be better for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, sort of bring your point, Matt, and mine to kind of put another sort of point on it. It's almost as if it's there is something to be said for what minorities or some minorities observe with these quote microaggressions, but I'm not certain that that is the right word. Sort of like what you were saying before, because it's like the people in this video, right? They are we can acknowledge. You guys can sort of imagine the video. Um, they're not acting rationally, and there is something to be taught. Like their behavior is not arbitrary. Like for them to have the fullest possible life is not to live like hypersensitive, right? I think so. You can almost maybe say is hypersensitivity like the vice that needs to be emphasized there, and that you can sort of then begin opening all these different boxes. Is like, okay, this person says this or this. Why is being hypersensitive to this statement going to cultivate issues in your life? Um, one more example. I know our podcast is running long tonight, but I think it's relevant. We can cut it out if need be. But I was listening to another podcast with Michael Shermer, and I'll be really quick with this. But he went to an LGBT meeting here, and Michael Shermer's an atheist, but he's very big on like free speech and sort of like leftist extreme, being against leftist extremism and such. And this LGBT group was very big on like safe spaces. And Michael Shermer sort of pushed against them a little bit, like, okay, why do you need a safe space? What's, what do you need to be safe from? You're on a college campus. It doesn't get any safer in that. And so what hate have you experienced? And they're sort of like stumbling amongst, oh, yeah. And finally one person offered something, and they're like, well, there was a guy or there was someone who was driving a truck down a street in campus, and they said, well, they didn't say F, but so I don't have to edit this out later. They said, F you, faggot, or fags. And Michael Shermer said, okay, I mean, is that it? And so, I mean, apparently, like, that was more or less it. And he said, okay, well, you got two choices to respond. You can either say F you back, or you can say nothing. That's it. And so without even going into the whole LGBT stuff, like, I think that there is so much to be said for that people can agree upon. It's like, you are wasting your life and energy by being this hypersensitive person, but instead focusing on those fundamental pillars of living. That's, more or less the most effective way. And, there's obviously a cost. That means that, yeah, might have to be silent sometimes or be a little bit, appropriately aggressive. But anyway, so those are some thoughts.
Completely unrelated. Well, yeah. So I don't know if I told you guys this. There's one time, I think this was the March for Life. We can cut this out because this isn't exactly related. But me and a few other guys were walking. So we had cassocks and collars and, so we looked like priests. And someone yelled from across the street. I couldn't tell who. I just heard it. But they yelled, F you, effing pedophiles, to us as we were walking down the street. That's kind of crazy. I don't know. Like that was the only time I've ever experienced
So
anything close to that.
You started a safe space group back in some
No, I mean, I don't know. To some degree, we were kind of like, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's one kind of feistier guy among us who was just like, if he said under his breath, so I suppose it wasn't that feisty, but he had some choice words, you know,
yeah,
to
but
us, about them. But yeah, I mean, then like, I don't know, we were kind of, yeah, to some degree, we're almost like proud of that, like, yeah, like we're doing something that like we believe in and other people
Yeah, I have a very misconstrued opinion of that, but
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is a relevant anecdote though, because it gets to sort of the heart of the thing. Like, what is the most rational human response? Well, Jesus tells us to, obviously not say F you. Um, but even the other option has some validity to it in the right circumstance, and anything else is, you know, a waste of people's time and energy. So, okay, folks,
so
we have had a great
can we?
podcast here. Yeah.
Quick question: can we just throwing this out there? I feel like this has been a good podcast. It's longer, but I think it needed to happen. Can we hear the speech before we close again?
One more time. Is that
I
what
mean,
the audience wants?
we've never heard a speech twice. I just think we read a speech. We talked about a battle. We talked about the Civil War. Give your closing thoughts, and I feel like Lincoln's words
Yeah,
were like
let's
we
do
can
it.
get better than Abe
That's a
Lincoln here.
great
Like
idea. That's a
so,
great
like
idea.
Mike, finish your thought. I had a thought, but I'm just gonna let it go because I don't think it fits.
Yeah.
It's less
Finish your
important than the
thought,
Anti
speech.
space.
and then let Abe's words linger in people's minds.
Okay. Well, before we finish the speech, folks, thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed your bottle of Tullamore Dew. First one is on us. Send us the receipt to Ross's address. Forget 8. No, not Harwood Drive. It's a funny sounding word. Next episode, what do we have to expect? We finished The Making of America. I don't know if we ever said that title, but that has been the title for these first 4 episodes. Next quad series, Ross doesn't like it. It's America's Growing Pains.
I don't think it's the best way to
Quad.
say it.
Growing pains is a mixed bag. It's positive and negative. Thank God your child is growing and not staying small forever, but there's some cost. There's some cost there. I believe we're going to have Matt Charles Schultz leading us off here with a speech from Theodore Roosevelt. Is that correct?
I believe you're right.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we'll look forward to hearing that. Enough for me. Let's hear this speech from Lincoln one more time. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in all fourscore. And 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure.
We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract.
The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here. But it can never forget what they did here. It is for us the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That is, this nation, under God,
Shall
shall
have
have
a
due
new birth
birth of
of freedom.
And
That
the
government
government of the people, by the
by
people,
for
for the
the people
people, shall
shall
shall not
perish
perish
from
from
the
the
earth.
earth.
Wow, that was beautiful, guys.
I just felt it. I wanted to.